We've solved the reflection problem. Not only did I get the direct email from, or text message from former Judge Small, Judge Barnett got a number of emails from his former clerk, and so everyone apparently is let us know that there was a problem that we have now solved. So our next juror. Oh, just a note for counsel. I've noticed in some of the questionnaires, if they say specifically what their position is, it might reveal who they are. So let's be careful. Morning, have a seat. You are juror number 2, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to have you pull up the microphone so it's pretty close to you.
Sure.
And if necessary, we might ask you to remove your mask.
That's fine. The cord's kind of caught.
Yeah, I think that's about it, the best we can do.
Is that all right?
I think we might have you remove your mask because that'll help,
Okay.
if you don't mind. I'll try
All right.
and stay 6 feet away from you, and we have plexiglass between us.
Okay.
Couple of things that I want to go over before I turn it over to the attorneys. First of all, I'm going to swear you in so that you can answer the questions today. So raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
All right, thank you. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire. Thank you for taking the time to do that. Sometimes after you fill it out, you realize that maybe there's something you should have added or changed, amended, and that's normal. So if there's anything like that that you can recall, is there anything you wanted to volunteer about that, or is it pretty much good to go as is?
I can't recall if there's anything I'd like to
Okay.
change.
All right, that's not a problem. Now, the questionnaire also advised you not to read articles, pay attention, essentially to avoid any media coverage of this trial. And the question I have for you is, since you filled out the questionnaire, has there been any media coverage that you became aware of, just inadvertently? Somebody's talking about it, you caught a headline, that type of thing. Not an intentional investigation of the facts, but just you saw something inadvertently, it was something you can't forget.
I think the only things I may have caught inadvertently were the dates of the start of the trial and the dates of the first call for jurors to be interviewed.
Oh, okay.
But no details besides that.
Okay, so nothing about the process, about the attorneys, anything like that?
No.
Okay. All right. Now, can you pretty much decide the case only on what you hear and see in the courtroom? That's probably the most important question, because most people have seen something about the case.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you can put aside anything you may have heard or seen outside the courtroom, essentially be the blank slate, and decide the case according to the facts and the law, and the facts based on the evidence you hear in the courtroom and nowhere else?
Yes.
All right. Did you recognize any of the witnesses on the list you were given?
I did not.
Okay. We have the trial estimate was in the questionnaire. Any concerns about the length of the trial? We think it's going to be, once you come back March 29th, if you're on the jury, it'll be about 3 or 4 weeks, we think.
I think that's manageable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And ultimately, can you be fair and impartial?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nelson then to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
Mr. Nelson.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. You nervous to be here?
We've been sitting long enough. I'm feeling a little better.
Okay, good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you some kind of general questions first, and then I'm going to move into some specific questions about some of your answers on your questionnaire, if that's okay.
Sure.
If there's anything I ask you that you don't understand, please let me know. And it's kind of awkward, but we're court reporters writing everything down, so we need to use words like yes and no versus mm-hmm or mm-mm. Okay?
Understood.
Okay, thank you, sir. First and foremost, let's just assume you and I met under different circumstances. We're at a party or some social gathering, and we are introduced to each other. What are 2 or 3 things that you would want me to know about yourself after we finish that conversation?
It's an interesting question. I suppose I'd probably talk about my work because I'm pretty passionate about it. I work in science. And so, you know, from that, I consider myself a pretty, I guess, logical person. Although I guess if we were meeting at a party, that might not be something that I would be bringing up. But yeah, my work, as I work as a chemist, and I'm passionate about that. I suppose I stay active and like to spend time outside. Yeah.
All right, great, wonderful. So you received in the mail a notice that you were being summoned for jury duty, right?
Yes.
And it had a copy of the questionnaire and a witness list with it?
Yes.
So when you first opened that envelope, in all honesty, what was your initial reaction?
Surprise. I mean, I wouldn't say that it was a different feeling than the feeling I got when I saw the summons in the mail, which is just kind of general, I guess, trepidation about being summoned for jury duty. But, and maybe upon seeing details, that was heightened. I wouldn't say that I felt any, specific other emotion though, besides, that initial trepidation.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally understandable. So you got the initial summons, right? Had some trepidation, and then you got the questionnaire second to that?
I want to say they were in the same letter, but I could be mistaken about that.
Okay, I don't know. I'm not questioning you, your answer. I honestly don't know. But so when you saw that you were being summoned in this particular case, you were obviously aware of this case before you received your jury notice?
I was aware of the case, yes.
And so when you see that you're being summoned for this particular case and the notoriety, would you say your trepidation increased?
I suppose. I wouldn't say that I was, maybe that was a poor choice of word there, but I wouldn't say that I was scared to take on, a trial of this magnitude. It was more of just, a recognition of the gravity of being summoned for a trial this important.
Okay. How about were you here yesterday, or is
Yes.
today your first day?
Yesterday I was here.
Okay. So how about when you first pulled up to the court and saw what had been erected around the courthouse?
Well, having avoided as much news about this as I could, I was a little surprised because I have been here before and obviously the fences were not there. But it did seem, I wouldn't say it was unexpected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did it cause you any concern?
I don't think concerns what I felt.
Okay. How would you describe how you felt? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Protected, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you actually felt safer when you saw that?
Yeah, I mean, knowing that those people were there to ensure that I was safe, I would say that's what I felt, yeah.
Okay. After you filled out the questionnaire, did you tell anybody that you had been summoned to come to court for this case?
Not for this case. My fiance, I did tell. She was there when I opened the letter, but didn't see anything on the letter.
Okay. But you've not told any other family members or anything that you're here?
Well, again, so I haven't been specific about the case.
Okay.
But I did, my fiance knows that I have been summoned and am here. And I had to tell my supervisor at work for approval for time off. But again, no details.
Yep, okay. So let me ask you a situation, I mean, and perhaps it's a science question or perhaps it's a personal question, I don't know. Have you ever been called upon to resolve a conflict or a dispute between two people?
Yes.
Okay. How do you go about the process of resolving that dispute? What tools would you employ?
So I'd honestly, if I were going to draw on an experience, for an example, I worked for a long time as like a summer camp counselor. And it feels weird to, compare an argument between two kids or campers or whatever, but because I did that for a long time and from when I was very young, and what I was trained to do is listen to both sides, hear them both out, and have an open dialogue about it with, I guess both parties.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually think that's a fairly reasonable analogy. So as a counselor, would it fall upon you to impose discipline if someone violated the rules of the camp?
In that position, no. I would have a dialogue with, a supervisor about what would be appropriate, but in general, that wouldn't fall on me.
Okay, so two kids have an argument, a dispute, a physical fight, whatever happens, right? Your job is to kind of wade through the details from both sides, right? Agreed?
Yeah.
And then can come to a conclusion about who is telling the truth, who is at fault, those types of determinations.
Yes.
Okay. And so when these two opposing sides would be kind of there, right? How would you, what tools would you listen to other than just having an open dialogue, right? How can you tell if someone's lying, I guess is the question.
It's a hard question. I rely, maybe this is going back now, backtracking to science, but I rely on facts and logic and what's in front of me. If a kid says that he got punched by another kid on the nose, and I look at the kid's nose and there's no blood coming out of his nose, or it doesn't look like it's been punched, maybe, that suggests the kid wasn't punched on the nose. I can only rely on what's in front of me, and I can only use what's presented to me in that dispute to resolve it.
Okay. So let me just draw on your example that you gave. Do you think that every punch on the nose results in a bloody nose or apparent physical injury?
No.
Okay. And so simply because someone said they were punched in the nose and you don't see the physical evidence of it, are you saying you would consider that person to not be telling the truth?
I would say that, again, the information in front of me, I have to make a decision one way or another. Mm-hmm. And so I rely on the evidence I have to make my best, the best decision I can.
Okay.
You can never, I don't suppose I can ever truly know if a person's lying or not. That would require me to be in their head.
So sometimes when I've examined scientists as potential jurors in cases, there is a level of information that's needed in order to formulate an opinion. Would you agree with that?
Opinion and fact are important distinctions for me.
Okay.
I can have an opinion, but I can't necessarily especially if we're talking about a court of law here, or me as a potential juror. If I have an opinion on something in real life, I have to be careful not to. I guess the criteria for me determining that opinion in real life are different than forming an opinion as a member of a jury.
Okay. How so?
Well, there are strict standards about, and rules set that, the judge outlined to us about, what were the words you used? I'm sorry if it's inappropriate for me to ask. Reasonable, beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Maybe those criteria don't apply to opinions in your day-to-day life, but they do here.
Okay, good. In that vein, can you think of a circumstance where you formed an opinion about something and then later evidence comes along and upsets that opinion?
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of that? I know it's put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. We keep going back to science, but I mean, science isn't a set of facts, right? Science is a set of theories that have been proven, and over time, more evidence is presented. But, at one point, the world's leading scientists thought that, the sun revolved around the earth. And then more evidence came to light, and their theory was adjusted. Same applies to me.
Okay. All right, I'm going to turn to your questionnaire and just follow up with some questions on your questionnaire. So the first question asked you to kind of detail what you knew about the case or what you had heard about the case. And I had some questions about how you answered them. You used the word killed in it to describe the death of George Floyd. Do you think that the use of that word is demonstrative of your opinion about this case?
Could you read the full
Sure.
context of that for me?
I would be happy to. He was put in the back of their car but escaped and was killed when Chauvin knelt on his neck area.
I wouldn't say that it's demonstrative of my opinion. I think that what I was attempting to convey there is that I guess I'm having trouble answering the question because I'm not, in my opinion, that phrasing just means that Mr. Floyd died because of something that, at least my impression of it, was he died due to something out of his control. And so to me, that's what the word killed means.
Okay. And so, I mean, it's fair to say, I mean, you're human, right? We all are. And when you in your questionnaire, you acknowledge that you've seen a Facebook video or certain videos of this incident, right?
I have not seen the video.
Oh, you've not. I'm sorry, I hadn't flipped my page. So you've not seen any of the social media videos or news stories with clips of the video or anything?
No.
Okay.
I've seen there's a still image that was pretty common, but that's the most I've seen.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. But based on your observation of that still photo, you formed an opinion about what was happening in that instant, right?
I wouldn't attribute that to the photo. I'd attribute that to news that was circulating at the time.
Okay. So you followed the news media about it a little bit?
At the time, yeah.
Okay. And you, based on the media presentation of the case, you formed an opinion about what had happened?
Yeah, I'd say I formed a tentative opinion about what happened.
Okay.
Sure.
And what do you mean by tentative opinion?
Well, I'm not an expert in law or any of that. And
Okay.
so I wouldn't say I was qualified to form an opinion on whether there was murder or whether there was, any kind of intent. I just formed an opinion on the events, I guess you could say.
What was that opinion?
That, what I said on the questionnaire, that Mr. Floyd was in the back of the car, and you said I would use the word escaped. It seems kind of like maybe I'd use a different word now, that he got out of the car, I don't know, and then died, was killed on the ground. Yeah.
And do you attribute responsibility for that to my client sitting here today based on the media presentation?
I don't think I can say one way or another. I mean, not here.
Okay.
You know, maybe at the time I had an opinion, but with some distance, I don't think I can say.
Okay. So your opinion or your perspective has evolved over time? Is that what you might
Yeah.
say?
I'd say that.
Okay. And you did visit the location of 38th in Chicago after the fact?
I did. I can't recall exactly how long after the fact it was.
Okay. Why did you do that?
It happened in my city. It was a transformative event for that area, and we were thinking, me and my fiance were thinking about moving into that area eventually, or nearby that area, and we wanted to visit.
Okay. You also indicated that you had a circumstance where you were involved, or someone was demonstrating road rage towards you?
Yes.
Okay. Can
Yeah.
you just tell me what happened in that situation?
Sure. So yeah, that was, I think, pretty close to when I filled out the questionnaire. It's interesting I put that in there. Yeah, I attempted to. I was exiting off of a highway and I tapped my brakes because I thought that somebody was going to cut me off and I didn't want to crash. The person behind me thought that I was brake checking them, tailgated me, attempted to pass me on the shoulder in a pretty dangerous way. I called the police, and that was it.
Okay. And the police responded?
Yes.
State Patrol, Minneapolis Police, do you know what department?
I think it was Minneapolis Police. I wasn't on the highway.
Okay. And what was your experience like with the Minneapolis Police Department in that instance?
It was neutral. They showed up probably an hour after I called, and by then most of my nerves had faded away. But there wasn't much to be done. There was no damage, so they just took my statement and were on their way.
Okay. Any other incidents that you've had with law enforcement in your life?
Yeah. I mean, nothing big, but
Sure.
like yesterday, when I was pulling in here, my car was blocked by a person who I believed was with the protests or something like that, and I had a conversation with the police officer who helped me get to the parking ramp.
Okay. Nothing about that is going to affect your ability to be fair and impartial in this case, is it?
No.
Okay. Have you ever had a negative experience with law enforcement?
A minor negative experience when I was working at that summer camp that was near a lake, and there was a year where the water was particularly high, and I attempted to turn onto a road that the police had blocked because a car in front of me turned on there and wasn't stopped, but they stopped me, and I was a kid, I was in high school, and they asked some pretty, I don't know if aggressive is the right way to say it, but some pretty aggressive questions to me about why I would do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that you had a souring effect on you?
No.
No?
No, it was a long time ago.
Okay. Was that the Minneapolis Police Department?
No, that would have been Orono.
Or no?
Yeah.
What is your overall perspective of the Minneapolis Police Department as you sit here today?
It's a pretty broad question. I'd say, all of my experiences with them have been positive. I think that, the police department, I'm an advocate for community policing. I don't know, I'm not an expert on a whole lot of
Sure.
policing techniques or, the way that the Minneapolis police is, frankly, because I haven't had a lot of interactions with them. But overall, I'd say that, my personal impression of them is fine, neutral.
When you say you're an advocate for community policing, what do you mean by that?
Just police connecting with their community is and honestly, again, I have not had a lot of experiences with police, so maybe that's, something that I'd like to change. I'd like to have an opportunity to interact with police more often, maybe.
Okay. So it's fair to say that I think you just said that you're not an expert in policing policies, practices, things
No.
of that nature. And if you hear expert testimony about various policing science, essentially, which it is considered a science, the science of policing, would you be able to differentiate between expert witnesses who may disagree on the appropriate application of that science?
What do you mean by that?
So if you have, think about it in your professional life. You have two scientists looking at the same problem and they reach different conclusions about the science. How do you resolve that scientific dispute?
I look at their evidence, I look at their methodology, and I based on what they presented to me. So I suppose I'd do the same.
Okay. You obviously have some scientific background. You're a chemist. If you hear scientific expert in the form of chemistry, right, and you are listening to an expert witness and you have some knowledge that you've picked up throughout the course of your education or your career, are you going to use what you think is the correct chemistry, or are you going to accept the chemistry as presented in court?
I think my gut reaction to that question would be I would want to find more information.
Okay.
If something that I think I know comes into conflict with something that is presented to me, what I'd want is clarification and more information.
Okay. So I think that raises a kind of a particular dynamic that sometimes happens in court. Is I'm not a chemist. I don't think that any of my colleagues are chemists. And sometimes we may inadvertently miss a question, right? And that strikes you as important, right? Because of your background. You're not going to have the opportunity to ask that witness clarifying questions. You're going to have to decide based on the evidence as it's presented in court. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And my question for you is, if you needed that additional information, or you felt that that additional information was important to the cause, or whatever the that's under consideration, and you can't get any additional information than what was presented in court, are you going to be able to set aside what you believe or you know potentially to be on your scientific background, or are you going to be able to decide it based on the evidence that's presented in court?
Yeah, I think I can.
So just a couple of questions in terms of, there was a page that had, I'm just going to see if you can see that, had a series of rate your opinion from 1 to 5, agree, disagree kind of a thing. I just had a couple questions on that. Question F within that category asked, Minneapolis police officers are more likely to respond with force when confronting black suspects than when dealing with white suspects. And it appears that you initially answered 3, no opinion, crossed that off and switched it to 4, which was somewhat disagree. Okay? I mean, you may not remember this or may not specifically recall your thinking in that moment, I understand that. But if I were to ask you that question today, Minneapolis police officers are more likely to respond with force when confronting black suspects than when dealing with white suspects, where would you rate yourself on that? Would you agree, somewhat agree, have no opinion, somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree?
I think I would align with my final answer on that. I would somewhat disagree.
Okay. Can you explain that?
I think so. I think if I were to explain my thinking, I don't have, the full slate of police encounters in front of me and information about them. So all I have is what has been presented to me, right? So through the media and all that. And so I think, keeping in mind any biases I may have had, I don't think that, I just don't believe that a police encounter with a black person from a Minneapolis Police Department officer is more likely to be, is it violent was the word? Or
Responding with force.
with force, yeah. I'd say I just somewhat disagree. It's just hard for me to make a call without, being presented with.
Sure. Well, I mean, and along that line, the questioner asks you, the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities, and you strongly agreed with that.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have the information to make that judgment?
I know more about that, yes. And to clarify, that was referring to the criminal justice system, correct?
Right.
So at the time that I'd done that questionnaire, I knew, or I do know now, about mandatory minimums and things like that are biased against racial minorities, statistically.
Okay, so you did some sort of I'm just asking out of curiosity, you kind of looked and did some research or looked into...
In the past,
In
yes.
the past, okay. So in terms of disparate sentencing between peoples of color and white people, you think that that's one way that the system, the criminal justice system, is biased against people of color?
Yes.
Okay. Are there other ways that you think that happens too?
I mean, it's possible, but that's the one that I'm familiar with.
Okay. And so your opinion is, that you strongly agree with that statement is predicated on that isolated kind of analysis, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. The last question I have about this page was, local police departments try to cover up excessive force rather than correct it, and you somewhat agreed with that. Can you explain your thinking there?
I'm not sure that I can. At the time that I filled out the questionnaire, I was still following news. And since then I haven't, and it's been a few months. So maybe, today I would have to revise that to no opinion, but yeah, I can't speak to what I was thinking at the time I filled that out.
I mean, was there something specific in the news at that time that made you think? Can you think of what was in the news that made you think that police departments cover up excessive force claims?
I can't recall. I couldn't tell you.
Okay, fair enough. You also indicated that your fiance has some medical training. She's a physical therapist.
Yes.
And so kind of along those same line of questions that we were talking about earlier, let's say you're listening to some expert testimony here in this case, and they're talking about restraints or various medical things involving asphyxia, okay? Would you rely on the evidence you hear in court, or would you go home and say, honey, this is what we're talking about, what do you think? And get information from her.
I'd rely on what I hear in court.
There were two questions in the questionnaire that I'd like you to expand on a little more, about Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. With respect to Black Lives Matter, you indicated that you viewed that organization in a somewhat favorable light, and with respect to Blue Lives Matter, you indicated that it was somewhat unfavorable, in your opinion.
Could I get a clarification? So Black Lives Matter, does it specifically say organization in there? Because if that's the case, I'd change my answer.
It doesn't specifically say in the question, but your response was, I don't love, underline the organization itself, parenthetical to extreme.
Yeah, oh, sorry, that was louder. Yeah, I don't love the Black Lives Matter organization. I do support the movement, or at least this is, I want to make sure because this is nuanced, but I support that, the message that every life should matter equally.
Okay.
I don't believe that the organization Black Lives Matter necessarily stands for that. I do think that, the phrase and the movement stand for that.
Okay. And that's, you have a favorable response to that, right?
Yes, I think all lives matter equally.
Okay. And you indicate that you kind of see Blue Lives Matter as a counter to the Black Lives Matter. Can you expand on that?
I think that I don't really see it as a counter, and that's why I think why I see it as unfavorable, because I don't see the two as mutually exclusive. I don't see why the counter to Black lives should matter the same as all lives would be police lives matter too, because in my opinion, the whole point of that is all lives should matter equally, and that should include police.
Do you think that the two, you indicated you don't think that the two are mutually exclusive, so in other words, both and, right?
I suppose, sure.
There's a question about, in the questionnaire, about evaluating graphic photographs or video, and you wrote, "I could handle it, but due to the weight of the jury process, I'm willing to be made uncomfortable." Can you just explain that a little broader?
Yeah, I mean, I don't go out of my way to watch or look at graphic things, but again, when I'm summoned for jury duty, whether it would be this case or another case, I think I value the importance of that duty over my personal comfort.
Right. So the last question in the questionnaire is about whether you want to serve as a juror in this case. You checked yes, and then with an explanation, why do you feel, and I liked your response that you feel that serving on a jury is a civic duty, you want to contribute, and you think you'd be good and fair and impartial, which I'm getting that sense. So let me ask you that same question in a slightly different way, if that's okay. There are some people who respond to the jury process in an effort to intentionally get themselves off of the jury. And there are other people who respond to jury questionnaires or jury questions in such a way to intentionally get on the jury, right? Because they have some particular belief or cause. Would you describe yourself as either of those?
My answers were truthful.
Okay.
That's how I would describe my answers.
Fair enough. Your Honor, if I may have just a moment to confer.
Mr. Slisher, it's getting close to our morning break. How long do you think? Should we take it now, or?
Let's go now, Your Honor. I won't be too long.
You would like to examine now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Juror number 2, you described your work and training in science as a passion. Can you please expound on that a little bit?
Sure. I guess I've always felt I had kind of an analytical mind. I excelled in science classes, math classes when I was younger, and kind of always viewed life through that lens, I guess you could say. I think integrity I guess that's the board is integrity is important, and it's easy for me to use that value or apply that value to my work, which is something that I like.
And did you say that your background is in environmental studies, or that's your degree?
My degree is environmental studies and chemistry. It's a combined degree.
All right. And tell me how you use your environmental studies degree in your current job, or if you do.
I do, yeah. I work in a laboratory that does environmental sample analysis. I'm not sure how specific I should be, but I guess it doesn't matter, right?
Don't name the employer, but just tell me what your day-to-day job is like without
Sure.
disclosing who you work for or exactly.
Yeah, that's fine. I receive samples that have been shipped into the company, and I test them for a wide slate of contaminants that are either environmentally concerning or dangerous to worker hygiene. And I also do, the company I work for produces products, and I do specific testing on them to make sure that they won't be harmful to the environment.
And so as a person who tests products on behalf of an employer who makes such products, sometimes I'm assuming you get a test result that could go one way and one that could go another. Is that right?
Sure.
And the employer wants to know the information as it is. They don't want you to massage it one way or the other. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so part of your job is to be an objective fact finder, I guess, every day. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about the camp that you worked for as counselor? I was interested in hearing that.
Sure. Yeah, it was a summer camp through my childhood synagogue in a western suburb. I worked there for like 7 or 8 years, 7 summers. Started as a counselor, worked as an advocate, working one-on-one with campers that needed additional help, and then worked as a senior staff member designing programming.
What age children are you working with?
It was K through 6.
You also mentioned that you and your fiance were interested in moving to the area of 38th in Chicago, or at least that neighborhood, is that right?
Neighborhoods in that region. It was a broad search.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you just describe what interested you in that particular area or those neighborhoods?
We were looking mostly in near the lakes down there, Lake Nokomis, Lake Hiawatha, just because we're active and wanted to be near, the creek, wanted to be near the lake, somewhere we could bike, walk our dog. And they had a good sense of community there, which was important to us.
You described yourself as enjoying outdoor activities, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you
Yes.
please expound on that a little bit? What kind of activities are you interested in?
I play ultimate frisbee in the summers. I go backpacking and hiking probably between 5 and 10 times a year, depending on the weather and the pandemic. That's the gist of it. We do a lot of biking around the city when we have the chance to in the summer.
Speaking of the pandemic, you see that we've taken some steps here to ensure social distancing and masking requirements and whatnot. Do you feel comfortable with the precautions that have been taken here?
Yes.
Do you think they're appropriate
Yes, sure.
given the pandemic?
Yeah, I think safety should be important for everybody involved here. Sure.
All right. I appreciate you answering my questions today. Thank you very much.
Pass for cause? All right. Hey, juror number 2. You will be on this jury. And so we're going to have you return on March 29th at 9 a.m. because we're not going to start evidence or anything else. Again, you're not an investigator. Do not go and investigate. Try and avoid all media coverage of this case. And if there's any change in schedule, as you've already noticed from yesterday and today, some things happen. But we're pretty confident that we'll be able to start March 29th at 9 a.m. And so I would ask you to report at 9 a.m. Make sure you're up here by 9 a.m. And you'll be taken to the appropriate, back to the courtroom that you're lounging in, and then we will call you in when the appropriate time is ready. Do you have any questions about that?
Just, I'm not sure if you're able to answer this question. Just
I'll tell you if I can.
If again, what kind of information am I able to disclose to, like, say, my employer?
What you should tell them is that you have been selected as a juror on a criminal case, and that the anticipated time that you will need that week and the following 3 weeks, so 4 weeks total.
Okay.
And that's what you should tell them.
All right. Thank you.
All right. With that, I would ask that you leave the yellow lanyard with the card on the witness stand,
Okay.
but make sure you keep your letter.
He needs a lanyard too. He has to keep the lanyard.
We changed it.
Okay.
We're changing things on the fly. We're going to keep the lanyard. You're going to be reissued it when you come in on March 29th.
Okay.
But the one thing you do have to keep is that letter that has the sticker and your number on it, because that, as you probably already found out, is how you get in. So make sure you keep that safe and bring it with you on March 29th. Okay? Any other questions?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, you can go with the deputy. All right, we're going to take our morning recess. We'll convene back here at 11:10. I note the Supreme Court asked for response to the PFR by today at 5 o'clock, so I don't know if the state needs, I assume that's being taken care of by those not in the courtroom. All right, thank you all. See you in 11:10.